Hey everyone, continuing my top 30 favorite films countdown. At number 24, I have Viridiana from 1961 by Luis Bunuel. Bunuel is often thought of as one of the great surrealists in cinema, which I certainly agree with. But I'll add that to me, he's also one of the great humorists, subversives, and perverts as well, all of which I value just as much as his surrealism. His films vary in how surreal they are, from the radical challenging of the film form in Un Chien Andalou and L'Age d'Or, to the wild premises and experiments in narrative of The Exterminating Angel and The Phantom of Liberty, which I already reviewed on this channel, to the dream sequences of Los Olvidados and Mexican Bus Ride. All this is to say is that this movie, Verdiana, is probably one of his least surreal movies in his filmography, despite being one of his most famous and acclaimed. It plays like a normal narrative, and everything that happens in it is literally possible, but its sense of humor, subversiveness, and perversion are so strong that it's clearly one of Buñuel's most definitive movies, on top of it being arguably my favorite feature of his. Well, it's the only feature on my list, so I guess inarguably. Now, this doesn't have a clear premise, like a group of rich partygoers can't leave a room, like in The Exterminating Angel, or a group of rich friends keep getting interrupted when attempting to eat a meal, like in The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, or Catherine Deneuve plays a wife that becomes a prostitute during the day, like in Belle de Jour. Instead, Verdiana has a plot that, as Andrew Sayers put it, is almost too lurid to synopsize. Well, let me give it a try. So, spoiler alert if you don't want to know. To put it bluntly and succinctly, it's about a nun to be who gets raped by her perverted uncle. After her suicide, she takes in a group of beggars to live in his big house, who go on to take advantage of her, and one of whom attempts to rape her before being killed by his own friend for money. Meanwhile, her cousin, who inherits the uncle's estate, gradually tries to seduce the nun, and in the end, it's implied that they have a threesome with the maid. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, it was denounced by the Vatican and banned in Spain until after Franco's death in the mid 70s, even after winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. But this isn't a purely outrageous work like my synopsis may have made it seem. Instead, it's a very complicated and morally complex work that challenges us to think about our reaction to it and where Buñuel's sympathies lie, even as he gives us very strong and humorous symbols and actions. So let's be fair to the movie and go over what happens in much more detail. It's essentially made of two distinct parts. In the first part, we meet the nun, Verdiana, played by the great Sylvia Pinal, who lives in a convent but hasn't taken her vows yet, which is why I called her a nun to be. She receives word that her uncle has invited her to his estate before she's to take her vows. He's paid for her education, although the two don't have a close relationship. Despite her reluctance, she visits her uncle, Don Jaime, played by the great Fernando Rey, who I like to describe as Buñuel's go-to dirty old man. They get along okay during her stay, although it's not difficult to detect Don Jaime's strange behavior as well as his complexities. On one level, his wife died on their wedding night a long time ago, and she happened to look exactly like Verdiana. He's been a lonely man for a while, so we can understand why he wants her so desperately to stay with him. But on another level, he fits his dirty old man persona very well. There's a scene where he tries on Verdiana's high heel and almost does the same with her corset, with her clothes spread out for him to try on later, I guess. He has a creepy obsession with the maid's daughter and how she jumps rope, and he asks for Diana, his own niece, to marry him, while having her wear his wife's wedding dress. After she rightfully rejects him, he drugs her and carries her upstairs to rape her. He kisses her unconscious body and starts to strip her. It's here, though, where he stops himself and does nothing further. The next morning, he lies and tells her he had sex with her, making her unable to return to the convent as a nun. Eventually, she leaves him anyway, and he commits suicide by hanging himself with the little girl's jump rope, but not before smiling and chuckling deviously. But let's stay on Don Jaime for a bit, because it's very easy to think of him as a bad guy from what I described about him. And while that is a valid thought, I think it's a bit more complicated. We have to consider that most of the section is framed from his perspective. After the milking scene, it's his movie, basically taking over as protagonist, making it inevitable, for me at least, to sympathize with him. But the genius of Buñuel is that he invites us to laugh at him at the same time. He seems pathetic as he tries on Verdiana's clothes. He seems clueless when he thinks that Verdiana might want to stay with him, or that she would actually marry him. And he seems creepy when he's overly interested in the girl jump roping, the way he smiles while staring at her, which is set up in the very first shot we see of him with the girl. And after the rape, he seems ridiculously incompetent the way he lies to her and immediately regrets it, completely bungling the situation. While at the same time, there's a portion of me that feels for him at least a little genuinely. He really did lose his wife all those many years ago. He really is very lonely, and the maid, Ramona, does vouch for his good character. And most importantly, though his intention was devious, he really did stop himself from going any further during the rape. I love the complexity that emerges from this paradox, how we're invited to see the humor and then laugh at the character who we're following, while never being quite sure if he's good or bad. This is part of the genius of Buñuel, who would do a very similar thing later in his final film, That Obscure Object of Desire, also starring Fernando Rey as a protagonist who we can never fully get behind due to his behavior. This is perfectly encapsulated in the final image we see of him, his dead body hanging from a tree. Then the camera pans up to reveal that it was done by the jump rope. We should feel sympathy, but then we're reminded of his perversions. Buñuel puts us in sympathies with the pervert. To me, this just screams that Don Jaime is a surrogate for Buñuel himself. Moving on to the second half, which has a completely different focus from the first, and pretty much feels like a different movie. Viridiana has chosen not to return to the convent and stay on at the estate, and in light of her now believing that her virginity has been taken, she decides not to take her vows. Instead, she wants to humbly turn to charity and decides to show her devoutness by taking in a collection of beggars and outcasts, the downtrodden, if you will, to live in her uncle's estate. Meanwhile, it's revealed that before his death, Don Jaime had invited his son, who he never really knew, Jorge, played by the great Francisco Rabal, to come and inherit the estate, which he does. The two clash on a couple of levels. Jorge wants to renovate the estate to make money, while Verdiana basically wants to become a homeless shelter. Jorge is a womanizer through and through, while Verdiana is a very attractive, devout Catholic. He might be able to imagine the tensions that start to arise. Eventually, when Verdiana and Jorge have to go to town for a meeting with lawyers, the beggars are left by themselves in the house. They usually occupy a smaller house on the estate, but this night they break into the main house to have a big feast. It doesn't take long for it to devolve into a drunken fiasco. I've seen it described as an orgy, and although I wouldn't go that far, nonetheless is out of control. When the masters return, one of the beggars who Viridiana took into her home starts to rape her. Jorge is able to bribe another one of them to kill the one who's raping her, and he does. Pretty rough stuff. Before I talk about how the movie ends, let's talk about what just happened. Viridiana charitably takes in the downtrodden out of good intentions, and they repay her by wrecking her house and attacking her. It's a pretty bleak vision, but a powerful one. I've had different views about where Buñuel's sympathies may have been over the years. Initially, I thought of this as strictly a parable, but later, I thought this movie might be hiding an insidious anti homeless message, and that Buñuel was demonizing the poor. Now, though, I think it's much more complicated. Just like the first half, we have to consider that Verdiana once again becomes a decentralized protagonist in the second half, with most of the action here being framed from the beggars' perspectives, as well as Jorge's, but more on that later. We get to know them well throughout, seeing their humanity as well as their flaws. They make us laugh, we may feel for some of them, and we may even have our favorites. So, like Don Jaime, we tend to look at the events from their perspective, with Verdiana simply as the master hovering over them. This isn't a matter of liking them, just a matter of perspective. And as such, maybe we don't feel so offended when they break into the main house and start to take everything over for themselves. It more or less feels like a collection of people who aren't rich, but have one night to at least pretend like they are. It's real people behaving like how real people might behave. But Buñuel complicates things, as he always does, by the rape/murder at the end. We couldn't possibly sympathize with them during this. Like how we're made to sympathize with the pervert in the first half, we've largely been on the side of rapists and murderers in the second. I think what the movie is trying to show us is that this is all in the face of Verdiana's religious attempt to bring these people up, tame them in a way. She gives them all tasks to do, leads them in prayer, and wants them to be nice to each other. But she's eventually shocked into realizing that humanity can't be tamed, and that people can't be forced to lead a life of devotion if they don't want to. Perhaps this is where the criticism of Franco comes in, but I can't be too sure. I'm not a history person and don't know much about the Franco regime, except that he made the Catholic Church a huge oppressive force for everyone in Spain. Aside from the attack on the church this movie is Buñuel comparing Verdiana to Franco? I'll leave those who know more about history to comment on that. Even if she is supposed to be a criticism of Franco, I don't think anyone could feel that she's a bad guy or that her intentions were devious. I think she was doing what she thought was best, but she learns the hard, brutal truth. Humans will be humans. Instincts are instincts. And sometimes we have animal instincts. We lust and we kill, and that's the way it is. To emphasize, Buñuel isn't saying we should applaud this, but by him bringing us in to follow these people, he makes the movie a powerful, morally complex experience. As if that doesn't make the movie rich enough, let's add Jorge to the mix. Along with the beggars, it can be said that he also serves as a protagonist in the second part, making Viridiana, the title character, arguably only the third most prevalent force in this part. He's not as important to the overall theme of the film as the beggars, but he serves as like a force that goes against what Viridiana stands for. He's Don Jaime's son, and I think it's instructive to view him as someone who has his blood running through his veins. I don't know if his father was a womanizer when he was young, but Jorge certainly qualifies. Firstly, he brings what seems to be his girlfriend with him to the estate, and it's shocking to Viridiana's belief when she calls her his wife, and he replies, "She's not my wife. I don't need anyone's blessing to live with a woman." When I hear live with, I immediately think have sex with. He has no qualms telling his girlfriend after she says he likes Viridiana. Such is life. It throws some people together and pulls others apart. Sounds to me like he just goes from woman to woman at whim, which is exactly what happens after the girlfriend does leave, and he immediately seduces the maid, Ramona. He also nudges Viridiana on, saying, "Why does a man leave a woman? If you don't know, I won't explain. A pious woman like you with no blood in her veins might be shocked." On top of his sexual escapades, he also goes against Viridiana in terms of their plans with the estate. He works the land and treats the beggars roughly as if they're pests, and if he had it his way, he'd throw them all out. If this were a more simple minded movie, one could call Viridiana an angel and Jorge a devil. Well, let's get into the ending, where she goes to the devil. In the original ending, Viridiana entered Jorge's room and closed the door. This ending was censored, but ironically, the new ending Buñuel cooked up and put into the film is much more powerful, suggestive, and risque. We start off with Viridiana with her hair down, dressed up casually for the first time, looking at herself in the mirror, all with tears in her eyes, and leaves the room. The little girl burns Viridiana's crown of thorns in a fire, which would have been a powerful ending by itself. But wait, we then see Jorge and Ramona together as a couple, but then Viridiana knocks on the door and gets invited in. Jorge then leads both of them to the table to play cards, all while the two women look shy, nervous, and possibly scared. He puts them into the correct positions, in this case on chairs, but in another scenario, who knows? Buñuel then shows us amazing close ups of Ramona, then Viridiana, and then Jorge confidently leading them on. In the end, he says the final line of the film: "You won't believe it, but the first time I saw you, I thought, my cousin Viridiana and I will end up shuffling the deck together." Now take the exact same scene, move the action to a bed instead of a table. Have Jorge put Viridiana's hand somewhere else instead of on cards. Make Jorge say having sex instead of shuffling the deck, and you have a threesome. It's uncanny how it's directed and acted like a sex scene, but the first time I saw this, I literally didn't notice at all. And at last, the circle is completed. Viridiana goes from devout soon to be nun to willingly giving herself to a threesome with her cousin. This is just one of many examples of Buñuel's humor that I adore so much, so let's finally get into what makes this movie so funny. Now, on top of Buñuel being one of cinema's great humorists, subversives, and perverts, in my opinion, he's also one of the great blockers and movers of the camera in film history, and his effortless mastery is a large part of the humor. Going back to the first part, what's the very first shot we have of Don Jaime? We're staring at the little girl's feet jumping rope, and into the shot comes Don Jaime's feet. The camera pans up and we see his hands fiddling behind his back as if he's planning something. Then it pans up more and we see him looking directly at her feet. We cut back to her feet, and then the camera pans up again to show Don Jaime ominously walking towards her from behind. Everyone knows about Tarantino's foot obsession, but while feet in his movies are a little more than meaningless decorations, I think, Buñuel's foot obsession is far deeper and more meaningful, which can be found in many of his movies. By spending so much time introducing the characters in this manner, it becomes hilarious and creepy at the same time. About a minute later, we stare at Don Jaime's and Viridiana's feet as they're walking. They stop, Don Jaime kicks the sand a little bit, and the camera pans back up. It's so deliberately shot like this that we know something is up. Buñuel's direction in a nutshell. So purposeful and amusing. But now let's go from feet to hands. Later on the farm, Viridiana is told to milk a cow, and we see a close-up of her hand shaking as it's approaching the teat. She's so fragile, devout, and prudish that she can barely muster up the courage to touch it. And when she does, it's hilariously super fast and too gentle. The second time, she just barely touches it. But the best part about this scene is when the girl says, Don Jaime is very good at it. Yeah, I bet he is. To show a later scene, one of my favorite parts is when Viridiana brings a new guest to stay with her flock. They discover that he may have leprosy and they want him gone, but Viridiana comes to his defense and begs them to accept him and treat him like one of them, giving them a little sermon in the process. Well, literally, as soon as Viridiana leaves, one of them pokes him and tells him to go, saying, Clear out or I'll slit your belly, and pulls out a knife. A woman encourages him, stab him if he doesn't go. So much for generosity. Later, in one of the movie's more famous scenes, Jorge sees a dog forced to run under a cart. He feels bad and negotiates to buy the dog from its owner. He agrees, and everyone is happy. He's just saved a dog from misery. Well, as they leave the scene, another car passes by him with another dog in the same exact scenario. Buñuel, not afraid to be unsubtle, pans towards it. But what I would call the Buñuel touch is when he cuts to a handheld shot right after following the dog from behind. I don't know why the handheld nature is hilarious, but it just is. And I guess only Buñuel knows the secret, because only he is a humorous genius enough to do it. Add in some fantastic cuts, like this guy's reaction after hearing that they'll have to work, or cutting from them talking about how they should be careful because they're such wonderful linens, to a glass of wine immediately being spilled directly on it. And you have a great comedy done through form and content. A lot of the humor is also tied to the strain of religious subversion that's strong throughout, especially in the second half. It's not hard to see why the movie was denounced by the church after such montages like this one, probably the funniest in the film. Viridiana is leading the group in prayer, and while they're seriously praying, Buñuel intercuts it with shots of work that's being done on the house, such as hammer blows, water splashing, a wheelbarrow tipping over, and logs falling. The sound effects of these various things happening is what really makes it funny. I mean, Buñuel is making a total mockery of the praying, thereby religion in general, and I can never help but chuckle every time I see it. But even this doesn't compare to the debauchery near the end that turns religious when all the beggars pose for the Last Supper. It could be mocking or tribute, I guess, but when the one in front lifts up her skirt for everyone, I think we know which one it is. Then the alleged leper plays a record of Hallelujah, dresses up in Viridiana's dress that she wore before, and dances to the music in a silly way. He then provides the most disturbing shot of the film as he throws feathers of a white dove that he had actually rescued before. He went from saving a beautiful animal to gleefully spreading its remains. True, that's pretty dark, but Buñuel overall makes the movie a hilarious attack on religious institutions, which thematically relates to Viridiana's doomed enterprise. Now, before I talk about my favorite moments, I have to mention the music and how it adds to the film's complexity. I happen to love all the music in here, starting with the Hallelujah from Handel's Messiah, the whole 2.5 hour composition of which is in competition for being my favorite piece of music. It's used a bit obviously here, but it provides the absolutely perfect moment that only Buñuel could pull off when Jorge enters the room with a face of disbelief. The music cranks up and cuts to the table during and we shall reign forever and ever. I'm tempted to show the brief moment with audio and video, but I'll instead encourage you to watch the movie and see for yourself. Also used is the Kyrie from Mozart's Requiem in D minor when Don Jaime tries to relax Viridiana, which is a curious choice of music to try to do that with indeed, because for us it just plays as foreboding as he gives her a drug to drink. The interesting part comes afterward, where after the music stopped, he starts the same piece over again. Why? He's about to bring Verdiana upstairs and do what he wants with her, so is he setting the mood? In that case, why is he playing ominous sounding music to accompany his own actions? There's an element of humor in him playing the same music again, but it also makes you think about him psychologically. And of course, there's the ending, which changes from classical music to 50s rockabilly. Considering how we started, with Hallelujah playing over the opening credits, how we got all the way to obscure rockabilly is jarring in the most wonderful way, showing how the nun has strayed. It's an extremely catchy way to end the movie that's impossible to forget. But now let me talk about my favorite moments, which includes the music I didn't mention. This is actually two scenes featuring Bach, who just so happens to be my favorite composer of all time, and it's not even close. In the first scene, we get Don Jaime playing the Sarabande from Bach's French Suite Number 5 on organ, which I appreciate because I love playing Bach, including this piece, on the organ setting on my keyboard. It's just beautiful. Anyway, this is a fantastic and funny example of psychological editing to me. We start with his feet, because of course we do. Then we pan up to his hands playing, and not movie playing, but actual playing, where the notes match. Then we cut to Viridiana in her room getting ready to get dressed for bed. She unbuttons her jacket, then removes one of her stockings, then the other, exposing the nun's sexy bare legs. Buñuel then cuts to darkness, yet another pan up from behind the piano, revealing Don Jaime's face as he's playing. Then, in my single favorite and funniest facial expression in the film, or maybe in Buñuel's career, he closes his eyes getting into the piece. I love it because this is something that I do when I'm moved by the beautiful Bach I'm playing, but here it has a hint of artificiality to it in the way he opens his mouth slightly before, perhaps revealing some humor in this. But on a psychological level, since this is intercut with Verdiana's bare legs, I get the feeling that Don Jaime is thinking about her as well, so maybe he's also being moved by imagining her beauty as well as by the music. Just amazing. The second scene begins with Don Jaime trying on Verdiana's clothes, and the music is Et Incarnatus Est from Bach's Mass in B minor, the massive work that started me on my Bach journey, and my former favorite composition. This part in particular is one of the most solemn and beautiful of the whole Mass, and the recording played in the movie is a slow and loving rendition, as it should be. That being so, seeing this sincere religious music being set to Don Jaime's kinky actions is scandalous and hilarious. But then Verdiana enters the room, not responding to his words, as if in a trance. She sits down by the fire, and the camera pans down to show her legs. And in another highly Buñuelian camera move, it does a dolly in, slight tilt up, and slight pan left, zeroing in on him looking at her legs. Brilliant. She proceeds to throw yarn into the fire, gather ashes and put it in her basket, walk to the bedroom, and deposit it onto the bed. The music playing in the background makes it seem like a sacred ritual or something, but your guess is at least as good as mine as to what it means. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But regardless, the scene is emblematic of why I love this movie. With the same music in the background, it combines the devout spirituality of Viridiana with the perversions of Don Jaime. Now for other scenes, or I should say very brief moments. In a movie filled with deliberate symbols, here's one that's comically obvious in the best possible way. In the attic, Jorge is seducing Ramona, the maid, with a kiss and words about how beautiful she could be. After being kissed, Ramona reacts almost as if she's never been kissed in all her years before, shaking like something profound inside her has been touched. Jorge then invites her to sit down with him, leading her by the hand. We then get a pan across the huge attic. The moment I'm talking about is when he cuts to this rat on a chair, minding its own business. The camera then moves back, and a cat suddenly jumps on it, and you can almost see the cat being thrown onto the chair by someone off camera. Obviously, I don't have to tell you that the cat represents Jorge, the womanizer, and the rat represents Ramona, the prey. Like I said, comically obvious. I love it. Finally, I want to go back to the Last Supper scene because there's a cut here that's truly mysterious. They're getting ready to get their picture taken when the woman yells, "Sit still." We instantly cut to a dolly shot, zooming in on the main guy who's supposed to be Jesus. And as this happens, we get complete silence, except for a cock-a-doodle-doo from a chicken. Then we cut back to the wide shot, and Jesus' expression completely changes from the haunting face before. I guess this is the most surreal shot in the movie, and I have no idea why he did it and why the chicken is there, but it's remarkable regardless. But in the end, what I love about Viridiana is that it's Buñuel at his scandalous best. Buñuel apparently claimed that he didn't intend to be blasphemous, but I don't know how you could put the stuff that he put in and not mean that. On the other hand, it's a very complex movie, so maybe he has a point. For example, things that have given me food for thought are what's the nature of the relationship between the two parts? Why exactly does Don Jaime smile before he dies? Was him inviting Jorge to the estate part of a grand plan? What exactly causes Viridiana to specifically bring in beggars? For a movie that's named after her, why doesn't she feel like the protagonist for most of the movie? It's questions like these that speak to the movie's complexity, which I've attempted to detail in this video. That doesn't make this the easiest work of his to accept, but it might be the most rewarding experience he put on film as a result. It's my 24th favorite movie. Thanks for watching my video. What could I possibly like even more than this movie? You just have to wait for number 23 to find out.